Glad to be here with you. My name is Micha Rave. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Hash Security. We mainly deal with, we build a platform for machine access, right? So, you might have heard of NHI, obviously, but we are doing something much broader. We want to change the way people deal with machine access today, quite similar to what human access has been look like in the past decade or so. So nice to meet you, and thanks for coming in.
Thanks for
Thank
having me.
thank you for having us. Good to be
Mhm.
here.
Felix, Francis, you want to introduce yourself?
I'll let Felix go. He's the OG.
Hello, my name's Felix Gapkins. I'm currently on a career break. I used to work as an analyst for more than a decade, covering privileged access management and machine IAM, or perhaps NHI as you want to call it.
And hi everyone, again, my name is Francis Odum. I'm the founder of the Software Analyst Cyber Research, where we focus on doing a lot of cybersecurity research across identity, SOC, cloud, and data security. Happy to be here and just to join the conversation. We've done a lot of work on this category. We've spoken to lots of practitioners. We've met with many different players solving different aspects of the problem. So just happy to share what we're seeing on our end.
Okay, great. So with that, I'm gonna introduce the first question, and happy to hear your opinion around that. So first one is, what makes the hyperscale and agentic AI area different from previous waves of cloud and automation? Francis, you want to go?
Sure. I mean, I could start. I mean, I think the biggest thing with agents, and you know, agents have been the biggest conversation this year. I think the biggest thing I see is now agents are almost going to be like employees. They're going to be like virtual employees of some sort. But with these virtual type of employees, so-called employees within your enterprise stack, um, you don't have a lot of controls or guardrails in and around them, you know, and in the near future, they're going to be carrying out tasks. You could actually not, you could imagine an agent having a Slack email, you know, and they're going to be pretty much accessing a lot of different things because many enterprises and companies are going to have them working and performing tasks and running a lot of processes across their enterprises. And so, and they speak a different language in a way from what we do. They also need the same credentials that every human employee would use as well. And so I think increasingly now we have to think about what does identity look like for them, you know, in terms of like how do we actually go about solving this problem and treating them like humans? What are the standing privileges? How do we actually go about the understanding their behavior, right? Whether those be around logs, you know, how do we actually go about mitigating and controlling their access? But I think in general, we've and historically, I mean, I'm sure Philip would talk about we'll talk about the fact that we've had service accounts. We've had a lot of different machine identities, but I think now with a lot of agents, you know, they're going to have excessive amounts of control. And so, what does that actually look like? I think everyone here is still trying to think about what that problem looks like. So.
Absolutely. Felix.
Well, I'm going to frame this in terms of machine identities, and I would just start by saying, hey, you know what? The luxury of being sloppy is over. Look, in the past, we've been dealing with accelerated cloud adoption, massive API growth, but here's the thing. We as an industry, not naming anyone particularly, I'm just saying we in general got sloppy about machine identities, right? We thought we had the luxury to sweep it under the rug because, hey, having credentials kind of worked. Yeah, sure, we had some breaches, but we just about managed kind of scrape by. And then AI agents arrived, and then suddenly that luxury vanished overnight. You can't be sloppy with ephemeral agents that spin up and down in seconds. And 60% of containers now live for 60 seconds or less. Try managing API keys for that. An AI workload by themselves grew about 500% in the last year alone. Here's the kicker, right? It's this AI wave is the nudge that we needed to finally do machine identity right, then we can apply those same solutions to all our legacy non-AI systems as well. We should have been doing dynamic, ephemeral identities all along. AI agents are forcing us to solve problems we've been ignoring for years. And let me just add to that, the economic state really changed everything here. As I mentioned, previous waves let us get away with technical debt. Sure, we'd have a breach, clean it up over a few weeks, move on, lick our wounds. But AI agents, they directly impact business processes and customer interactions. And we're talking minutes from compromise to business damage, not weeks. Yeah, I saw this pattern in my previous job talking to customers that organizations would kind of muddle through with static credentials because consequences were manageable. But AI agents operate autonomous, as Francis said. They're autonomous. So a compromised agent, it doesn't just steal data, but it can actually trigger cascading failures across multiple business systems in real time. And so the math is actually quite simple. According to the uh, average cost of a data breach by IBM, I think that the average breach cost 4.88 or 4.45. I think it's actually 4.44 million. It actually went down a little bit, but that's with traditional timeline. AI agent breaches could be faster and far more damaging because the economic forcing function is really making executives pay attention to machine identity.
I think that that's very true. I think for me, when I think about it, it's mostly, scale and automation, right? And autonomous, that's what I mean. So scale, first of all, Felix, very right. Like we had, if you look at the evolution of machine identity, so we started off with, monolithic architecture where everything was kind of tight and everything was well designed and trust was inferred. Then we moved to the clouds, and then we moved to automation, infrastructure as service, containers, and so on and so forth. And now AI kind of, broke the ceiling with the way that, you know, um, basically workloads are interacting with their environments. And the autonomous part of this means that it's very unpredictable. So everything can kind of, spin in and out, and there is no control, no human in control in the midst. And that was, I think, one of the most troubling things. So first of all, scale is going, through the roof, and then the predictability and the guardrails that Francis also mentioned before, it's very hard to do it. And I can just add just another, dimension to that is the coupling of the identities of the users that are actually want to, use and consume those agents, and what those agents are doing on their behalf. It's a problem that hasn't been, solved properly yet. It just means more identities, ephemeral, as you said, and completely unpredictable.
Yeah, I agree to that. And here's the thing. Yeah, AI is that hot thing right now. Everyone wants to talk AI agents. Problem isn't new. We haven't solved it for the old use cases. So I'm actually quite happy that, through all of this AI buzz, we're actually starting to solve the problems that we should have solved for, in the non-AI world, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Francis, you're on mute.
Nope, that's absolutely correct. I was like, yes, there's still a lot of challenges that we need to solve. And I mean, I still think we're still in the early innings of the AI agent in terms of like all of the practitioners and leaders who even speak to. Not many have a lot of projects right now, but we know this is going to start coming up within the next couple of months. But to Felix's point as well, like this is going to allow us to solve a lot of the existing problems we never really solved for a lot of your machine identities that exist in different forms across cloud, on-prem. But it's only the problem is only just gonna exacerbate over time. And so I think the industry needs solutions in and around this. So
I fully agree. Going into the next question, I think it's kind of related. Where do you see the biggest AI-related identity risk emerging over the next few years, right? So Felix, you want to go first, maybe?
Sure. I think there are actually two that I would mention. And let me maybe start with the organizational chaos factor here. Okay. So I think biggest risk isn't necessarily technical, it's organizational. Right now, machine identity is everyone's job. And guess what? It ends up being nobody's job, right? Developers create identities, ship fast. DevOps teams, they don't really think about security implications. Security teams are supposed to clean up the mess after incidents, effectively like cleaning up after the kids. It's never a good thing. And with AI agents multiplying identities exponentially, this whole model is catastrophic. Every agent creates multiple identities. Most organizations can't even see this happening. There's no governance framework that can keep up. But here's the brutal reality, right? 87% of organizations face machine identities attacks in 2024, yet only 15% felt confident they could prevent them. AI agents are making this problem orders of magnitude worse. And organizations that don't get their governance act together in the next 18 months will probably face regulatory nightmares under frameworks like it's good if they um if they have to comply with them. And then the second thing, it's a bit more technical, which is the authorization delegation nightmare, right? Here's kind of what keeps me up at night: authorization delegation. The human can't just hand over all their access to an AI agent because these things, as Francis said, they're autonomous and they can use those permissions however they see fit. But we need agents to act on our behalf, right? So now we need some kind of purported restricted rights that change based on the context and the task at hand. And it gets worse because agents need to delegate to other agents. Things, MCP servers, MCP clients, agent chains, the whole shebang, the whole ecosystem. There's an area of intense research right now because frankly, nobody's completely figured it out yet. It's really interesting. And then there's, of course, the malicious consent problem as well. Like picture an AI agent that tricks you into granting excessive permissions for some kind of nefarious purpose, right? Traditional consent models assume that the requester is trustworthy. With autonomous agents, it's kind of like all bets are off. So we're dealing with authorization models that didn't exist 2 years ago. The traditional RBAC and even many of the ABAC models break down completely when you have learning and adapting systems.
For sure.
I really I completely agree. I mean, even just building upon that autonomous nature of a lot of your AI agent, I think definitely the authorization, the access entitlements that most of these agents, because again, as I said earlier on, as agents start to almost acting like virtual employees and now can have access credentials across your enterprise. We're going to find, and it's another thing too, with agents, they're going to be very easy to create, right? Every employee will have X number of agents helping them on HR workflows, finance workflows, some technical workflows, some type of a batch job, different types. And so you're going to have employees constantly spinning up a multiple of these agents. And so what you're going to actually find is a situation whereby they're going to start growing with more and more entitlements and more entitlements. And so the more entitlements you have around this, what kinds of guardrails and controls do we have around this for all of your AI agents? So I think this is definitely a big one now. And even how do we manage their privileges? What do we put for just-in-time controls in terms of just-in-time privileges for these? What do they have access to? What should they have access to? Especially as an agent spins up another agent, right?
Mhm.
What does that actually look like? What does that enforcement guardrails? I think this is really the big risk, because what happens in a situation where an agent creates another agent and you have a misalignment problem, right? You have a because this is another problem with AI agents, and we've seen some results out of the foundational model companies suggesting some of the misalignment challenges, and if you have you have an agent that's misaligned, maybe recommending another customer's product, or because it believes this is the right thing to do. What does that actually look like in terms of some of the challenges in and around that? So I think this is definitely a big one that we're thinking about. And then I think even just agents are going to have a lot of logs in a way within the enterprise, and how do we actually go about capturing logs for a number of these, and so these are some of the biggest risks I think enterprises are thinking about. And I mean, the always basic foundational question is your shadow agents. Are there agents that are hiding in and around my enterprise that we don't even have visibility across? And so these are maybe some of the biggest AI risks that we hear from a lot of our research these days, and everyone's obviously thinking through those challenges.
I absolutely agree. And I think there is some kind of, a trust collapse within the enterprise because we don't know, we will not be able to know who is doing right? Because agents are kind of taking more and more autonomous decision. They now go into security, they do IAM, and they do additional stuff. And to your point, Francis, agents are going to spin additional agents in the future. We are just at the beginning today when we want to put in an MCP or an agent. We go through the process, hopefully for most companies, and we do that very responsibly. But in the future, those agents will be able to spin their own agent because they will need them to complete some kind of task. And this is going to be even worse. So if cloud automation kind of stretched IAM in a way, AI era is going to tear through that, without stopping, and we will need to put some kind of control over this. You mentioned several, things like, first of all, by the way, auditing and logging for all of this is also a very important task that needs to come, responsibly with AI. And we will see new breed of companies that will, tackle each one of those pieces, I believe. Great. So the next question, what are the biggest blind spots our organization face today when managing service accounts, API keys, and tokens? Switching gears a bit.
Maybe
Come on,
Felix,
Felix.
start with that.
May I? Because I'm kind of at the edge of my seat over here, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, great. Let's get back with one foot on the ground. Let's stop talking about AI just for a second, and let's focus on the actual question. What's the problem with service accounts, API keys, and tokens today? Well, you're managing the wrong problem. That's the big problem, right? Let me be blunt, right? Focusing on managing NHIs better is like, taking antacids all day instead of changing your diet. Problem isn't management. Okay? Problem is we're still creating these things and we shouldn't. Organizations are still doubling down on static credentials instead of learning modern patterns. They're buying NHI management tools thinking that's strategy. It's not strategy, it's tactical duct tape on a fundamental architectural problem. Now, the real win isn't cleaning up what you have, it's stopping the creation of new technical debt. Every NHI is what I call the asbestos of cybersecurity, right? It's just terrible, terrible technical debt. Here's a reality check, right? Just 2% of human workload identity permissions that were used in 2023. 2%. That means 98% of unused permissions are creating unnecessary risk. And we're not talking about better rotation schedules or fancier walls. We're talking about fundamentally broken architecture here, right? And of course, who are you going to blame on that? Picture yourself, you're an infrastructure engineer or some kind of developer, and you have a batch job that needs database access. So you call the security team or even the IAM team saying, how do I do this right? What do you get? Tickets. So you kind of look it up on the internet, and you create an API key, stick it in a config file, or maybe even a vault and move on. And that's, yeah, there's no guidance on modern patterns here, right? So you really have to stop creating new static credentials immediately because there are much better way for doing this. I always talk about that Swiss Army knife of dynamic credential management. And much of these things you may already have. You probably use OAuth already. You might be using service meshes. There's Spiffy out there as well. Managed service accounts in the cloud architecture, right? Focus on how to secure machine-to-machine interactions rather than how do I manage credentials, right? I would say some more about the observability black hole, but I'm going to shut up because maybe Francis is going to talk about that. He did talk about that last week, but observability, of course, is another issue here.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, yeah, that one definitely is observability, and that one's definitely a big one that we could save that one maybe for another day, another conversation. But to your point about whether it's overly static credentials or long with credentials, I mean, definitely still resonates. I mean, I think another popular one that's still I mean, you hear a lot about this, but it still happens a lot more. is it around like whether it's your CI/CD pipeline leakage, whether it's still you still have secrets that are being still stored in like build pipelines, with very minimal amounts of scope, just really poor hygiene. I think that's still one that's still very, very still a
You shouldn't be
prominent app.
using them. You
Sorry?
shouldn't even be using static credentials in your pipelines either. Don't use them.
Exactly.
There are other
Exactly.
ways around it, right?
Exactly. So yeah, it's still shocking, but this is things that I will still hear about you today, which is still a very interesting one. I think another one obviously is around, whether it's enterprises that maybe had hybrid environments, but you know what? But with their SaaS migration and SaaS transition, service account, they have service and tokens that are often they're outliving the apps or the all that engineers actually created. And these are a lot of your offline those zombie accounts, that haven't been clearly decommissioned. And so as you guys know, attackers love to use a lot of these often the zombie accounts that still haven't been disabled completely or decommissioned completely. So I think that's
Yeah.
one. I mean, the visibility inventory problem is still that one is still always there as much as we think it's still solved. Um, you know, if you still ask companies today, where are all, I mean, maybe API keys they could tell you, but do they have good visibility across all service accounts, whether it's on-prem cloud, being able to like have that synthesized inventory across all of your different SaaS, cloud IAM, config files, all of these, it's still a major challenge. So we still have a lot of gaps today, even just on the inventory side, but those are some of the prominent ones, that at least we hear on our end.
Oh,
Right. Finally, we're kind of disagreeing a little bit with you. And by the way, I don't really disagree with you, Francis. I'm just saying, sure, we have that technology there, right? We have that asbestos in the building still, right? So yeah, we got to clean it up, right? And that's you're 100% on that one. What we should not do is to continue creating more of this technology debt. That's really important. You really don't want to have any kind of static token if you can avoid it. There may be some very rare cases where you really can't because you're dealing with a legacy app and the only thing they can do is hand out a static API key, right? But that's the exception, right? The norm should be, don't use these things. Don't create any
Why
more
do you
debt.
think why do you think organizations still fall into this, like from your opinion?
Because they don't have any good guidance. If you're a developer, it's not really your problem. If you don't get the guidance from the organization saying, you know what, use a managed service account in Azure, for example, an infrastructure managed service account, rather than using your own thing. Or if you don't have the guidance to say, well, you know what, use MPLS with OAuth for your client credentials, or use Svify, or use something dynamic that can't be stolen. Well, if you have that guidance, if the infrastructure is not there, you're going to default to whatever works best for you. And if it's your job to just tip faster, it's not your problem. This is exactly the problem.
I
It's not.
would I would answer to that, Francis, that there are several issues kind of preventing us from moving there. First of all, it's never a KPI, right? To use something that is better from the security side. I think until CISOs and CIO would start, imposing, understanding that and imposing that, and that would start percolating down. The second thing is that there are no good tooling today to facilitate that migration, right? So in some cases, I can show you, that you're using a legacy static key where you can actually use, a service account or something, or OOS or something more, sorry, modern. But in many cases, we don't have that tools in place. And then when you want to move that, that's a very big engineering effort across the entire company because the ownership is completely fragmented for those things. As you said before, the security team is responsible for cleaning up. The DevOps team are responsible for bringing those API keys, those static keys, putting them there, and then engineering the developers, the poor developers, they need to pick that up and implement those things in their code. So you've got a very complex, kind of fragmented process that need to take place. And at the top, it's not even understandable that this needs to be a KPI to address.
Because that model is
Yeah.
broken. That model is really broken.
Absolutely. Yeah, and yes, I mean, we could go on and on about this, but I guess you have your forward-leaning organizations, but your organization that is so stuck in the past, it's still surprising you still see these things with them. And it's the difficult problem, especially when you have a very hybrid type of environment. So good, yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think that that's the key takeaway from this discussion is the model is working. You don't need to keep fixating on, how to collect and protect the old world, but just move to a new one. And by the
Exactly.
way, the human identities, for example, we've done that, right? The past decade, we've done everything, IGA and PAM and SSO. These are the kind of things we need to go into instead of just building better vaults, or things like that.
Well, that's I believe it has to do a little bit of both things. You can't just ignore the legacy, right? And there are some models that you could probably shift pretty easily, but there are others that are just going to remain there. Probably some of them kind of indefinitely, meaning at least until I retire. That's kind of indefinitely for me. But for all of the new things, you could do it right. And that's, I think, really the challenge. Right now, people are kind of focused on how do I manage my debt? And in the process, they create more debt. And that exactly is the vicious cycle that the organizations have to get out of.
I completely agree, which is a great segue into the next question, which is how do framework like SPIFFY and Zero Trust apply for machine identities in practice?
You're
Francis, you
definitely
want to
the
start? Yeah, you start. You start.
guy.
I'll pounce on you afterwards. Oh, just kidding.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not an expert here on PIFI. You've done a lot more work in and around that, like a lot of more of your ZTNE and zero trust frameworks, but I mean, I think it need a few things. I mean, typical zero trust, what at least I learned there is like, you never trust, always verify, right? Like, and I guess what does that actually look like if we actually apply that to machines instead of people, right? That same zero trust mentality for machines, and so that might be a continuous verification, for every API call, right? Or every connection or every attestation, this could also apply to apply like your just-in-time controls for for every machine that you have, right? So your service account, it has to perform these storks, and per action per tool, we give it the least privilege that at least it needs to do its work, or you could even think about this to whether it's your short-lived credentials, where moving from the old world of static to more short-lived credentials that are for specific task, or policy-driven ways. So there's so many ways, at least when I think about it from a zero trust model, that we could definitely apply here as well, and I mean, Felix could definitely talk more about SPIFFY and how what that does in terms of a lot of your machines there. But just I think a zero trust absolutely a framework does apply here, and we don't see a lot of these, but we need more and more leveraging a number of these for machine identities as well as eventually agents when they get there. So
It may be that not everyone is completely familiar with, if you give you a quick overview. So every time you spin up your workload, whether that's a container or a serverless function or a batch job, you face the same fundamental question. How do you give this thing its first credential securely? Right? Now, even if you use a secrets management tool, you still need to solve the bootstrap problem because how does your workload authenticate with the secrets manager in the first place, right? This is chicken and egg problem that's kind of plagued infrastructure team for decades. And enters SPIFFY, the secure production identity framework for everyone, which is an open framework, and it really represents a fundamental shift in thinking. Like instead of asking how do we secure how do we securely distribute secrets, it asks what if workloads could provide and prove their identity without any pre-distributed secrets at all, right? And that's really the foresight that changes everything. Your infrastructure already knows where workloads are running and how they got there. And so City leverages this existing knowledge to bootstrap cryptographically verifiable identities automatically. So City really is your game changer. It's wrench or screwdriver level important. It bootstraps identities for workloads at runtime without any kind of static provisioning. It's perfect for ephemeral containerized environments, um, and even for bare metal implementations. Now, there are some other alternatives to using Spiffy. For example, you could use managed service accounts in cloud infrastructure, but they work really well within their environments. If you're looking for something that goes across all kinds of different deployment models, you'd either have to federate them or use something like Spiffy, right? And so that the key insight, I think, for everyone would be that um, you want to evolve from better credential management to dynamic workload trust, right? This really underpins a lot of these things, and it interoperates beautifully with things such as OAuth, with service meshes such as Istio and Linkerd. You can federate it, and they are very versatile because they give you that cryptographic identity in the form of either an X509 certificate, which you can use for MTLS straight away, or as a JSON Web Token or a job, which you can use immediately for proving your identity or even the claims from there and do authorization for a lot of other services. I hope that was not too deep in the weeds, but we've seen a lot of discussions right now in LinkedIn where they bootstrap even agent identities using Spiffy and then use that Spiffy ID to exchange it for other tokens or connect to other services and so on.
I think, Felix, this is spot on, and Spiffy was designed for modern infrastructure, right? Exactly, as you
Yes.
described it, solving the secret zero problem, and
Yep.
even talking about federation because you are moving between clouds, hybrid production environments, and so forth. And Spiffy was actually designed to solve most of the problem. The problem that I see with Spiffy is that it's not well adapted, and as far as we can tell, it's not because it's not the right process, but because there is not enough, I think, power behind it, or maybe incumbents that are pushing that. If you look at SAML, for example, and OOS, which has done, a great thing in the analogous world of, again, human identities, there isn't anyone that's kind of standing, and pushing that standard forward. And until then, it's going to be very slow and hard to adopt it. It's definitely,
I
the mark
I'm
to go to,
I
but it's going to be
don't
hard
know
getting.
about that, man. I don't know about that. I mean, there's significant momentum behind it. Even Google uses it internally, and as I mentioned, Sticky will give you a certificate, which is like very common currency or a JSON Web Token. So you actually see a lot of organizations that are looking at it and deploying it right now, and a lot of AI agent development where they use it to bootstrap the whole thing for MCP servers and agentic AI for it. I'm not saying it's the only thing, but it is one of the tools in the Swiss Army knife, out of which there are a lot of other things as well, service meshes, uh, managed service accounts, all of these things, even the workloads, identity management tools or and API tools, as vendors call it, vaults, all of these things are there. But yeah, speaking is like one of these screwdriver or wrench type of important tools in there.
I think what we'll see is that companies that have excellent, engineering and mindset for engineering and security will adopt that. As you mentioned, Google, and there are other, players in the field like Netflix has a very strong sense of those as well, and some other players. They will adopt that internally. But I want to see that more even externally. When I go to Twilio or to Stripe to process my payment for my workload, I want to have spiffy control there as well. And that's going to take a little longer, but I definitely agree that this is, the path is there. It's one of the tools in the toolbox, and it's going to grow in popularity. Okay, so just as a last question, just to try and close this nicely, what do you think is the right operating model? Should IAM teams go own machine identities, or should it be under cloud, DevSecOps, DevOps, and so forth? What is your take? Felix, you wanna go first?
Sure. I mean, let's maybe start with a little bit of a reality check over here, right? So before you worry about, for example, which team owns machine identity, ask whether you actually have the executive support for organizational change. That's really what it's about. Without people sponsorship, machine identity initiatives will fail regardless of which team will lead them. And security leaders think they really have to start articulating these business risks in executive terms. We have 45 machine credentials for every employee. Each costs 4.44 million on average. There's not necessarily a technical problem. The business risk requiring executive leadership. And so the organizational model matters a little less than the sustained commitment, right? I've seen successful implementations led by IM, by platform engineering, even by individual application teams that became centers of excellence and really understood all of this thing. But here's the warning: if your teams are unable or unwilling to drive machine IM transformation, find someone else fast. Machine identity can't wait for organizational politics, right? Every day of delay creates more technical debt. Talk about more security risk, more future migration work, and all of that. So I don't really think the question is which team should own this. Probably more of a question which team has the executive support and the cross-functional influence to make it happen. What I found that the best way to actually solve this is more or less in a federated way. For example, to talk about a team IM working group that is comprised of stakeholders coming from multiple teams coming together, analyzing their use cases, seeing what they're doing currently, what they should be doing better, and then not just coming up with organizational policies, because policies should tell you, don't do that. They don't tell you how to do it instead, but also the guidance on how to do it properly. So then you can make those investments into your Swiss Army knife of tool sets and deliver that with the guidance for the developers and infrastructure folks and all these other people on how to use this. And that's how you actually solve this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Yes, I mean, one thing I'll just even add to it. I mean, it's a challenge because I think increasingly now to the world that we go to, I think obviously machine identities all will always be, but as we think about how machine identities themselves will evolve now with AI agents being prominent and speeding up a lot of things within the enterprise, I think you could make the argument, you could make individual arguments for why IAM teams, cloud DevOps, or SecOps and the key roles each of them plays. But ultimately, as much as it's a cliche answer, it just feels like it has to be a shared responsibility model in some way or the other, right? That everyone has to own a little bit of this. Everyone has to be fully aware of the risk associated with this. Whether from the SecOps part, they got to make sure they're getting their logs, they're monitoring, they're getting all the visibility from all the different machine identities they have, whether it's like the response playbooks to actually go about remediating, revoking, killing, kill switch, or whatever. Your platform engineering teams that are actually running and building a lot of these solutions, whether it's making sure they're aware of species, like as we've just talked about, like leveraging these frameworks while they're building up new things. Or your IAM team, obviously. I think that one is obviously very obvious. So I think the long story short of it here is the operating model is some type of a shared responsibility model, where it's kind of like what we have for DevSecOps, right? DevSecOps. And I think maybe this time around, do we have DevSecIAM? I don't know what that actually looks like.
Exactly, yeah.
Oh my God.
There we go. We're making those. I mean, yes. I mean, it might actually have to be because now everyone says identity is the new perimeter, and so IAM team's not gonna have to come run, and so we might have to need that try platform, and so that would be my recommendations to organization. Everyone has to be talking about risk. Everyone has to make sure they're incorporating processes in and around this and using some of these frameworks that they serve as a good operating model across multiple areas. So
I definitely agree with both. I think the shared responsibility model is the way to go. I would add two requirements of my own to this. One of them is that there have to be some kind of governance that we will be able to put in place. Otherwise, those things won't work, the processes and the enforcement of this. And the second thing, I think it should be relatively easy to migrate into this new architecture. Otherwise, if it's going to take you 5 or 10 years to change everything you have into this new model, that's never going to work. We need a system that can help migrate existing, broken things into this new era and put some guardrails and enforcement on top of it. And then when all of the stakeholders in that chain, that makes sense for them and it's the right thing and easy for them to use and valuable, this is how we're going to drive this into, the near future, let's say, and not like the end of times. Okay, I think we're kind of on time now. Gentlemen, I want to thank you very, very much for this lively discussion, and I learned some stuff and appreciate the time you gave on this. Thank you very much.